What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Berk aka Dansgwait here, and welcome to part 2 of this Ultimania Secrets video, in which we continue to take a look at the music of Final Fantasy X through interviews with the 3 composers that worked on the game. They are of course Nobuo Uematsu, Masashi Hamauzu, and Junya Nakano. In part 1 we had a look at disc 1 and 2 of the Final Fantasy X soundtrack, and I did say that the second part is going to cover disc 3 and 4. So hopefully you guys have seen the first part already. I am going to continue in the same vein that I did last time. We will be going through some more of these tracks, we'll be listening to them, and we'll be hearing the thoughts and stories from the composers who worked on and created these tracks. So without much further ado, let's continue on to disc 2 and listen to some more wonderful music from the soundtrack of Final Fantasy X. So yes, we have the Thunder Plains theme. This is track 1 of disc 3, composed and arranged by Masashi Hamauzu. This is a track that I think maybe is a little bit underrated potentially. It's one that I've always enjoyed in the setting, and I think the reason I've liked it is because you have this sort of gloomy, miserable environment where it's raining all the time and there's dangerous lightning going on. And I think in terms of gameplay, it's an area where things can start to get a little bit dangerous as well. If it's your first run or you're not that experienced, it's also the area where you have to dodge 200 lightning bolts in order to get the Venus sigil for Lulu. So it's a place that has a lot of negative things going on with it in that particular sense. But I think this track, especially in isolation, when you take it away from the area, it has this sort of upbeat, warm kind of energy to it. At least it does for me. And so when I see this track contrasted with the environment that we have and the context, it's something that I've always kind of enjoyed. I'm not going to say it's one of the best tracks in the OST or that, you know, it's one that's beloved by fans or anything, but I definitely think it's a solid track and maybe a little bit underrated. So let's hear what Hamauzu had to say about this piece of music. As always, thank you to Dawn for the translations from the Ultimania Omega, so I'll be paraphrasing, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to convey the general idea of what they're saying in these interviews. So Hamauzu says that he put a great deal of effort into this one, so for that reason he feels like his musical identity really came out in this track, even though it wasn't something that he was deliberately trying to do during the creative process. Now, interestingly enough, he says that with this particular track, he didn't really know or think about which particular part of the game it was going to be used in, or what cutscenes were going to play when it was being used. So then it leads into an interesting aspect of the development process, which is something that I personally wasn't very familiar with, and it's the idea that I always thought people like Uematsu or Hamauzu or Nakano, they were the ones who said, for the Thunder Plains, use this track. But the way it worked, at least with Final Fantasy X, I think for some of the tracks, was that these guys were probably given a brief to make something that sounds like X, Y, and Z. They produce the track, and they don't actually know where it's going to be used in the game. And it's the event team who decides that we're going to use this track for this particular location. So then Hamauzu goes on to say that he thinks the event team did a really good job of using the track in the most suitable scene/location in the game. He then says something quite deep. He says it's a song that makes you feel eternity, so the correct answer is that it plays in the rain. Now, this is something that when I read the line, it sounded really kind of deep and profound and romantic, but like when I heard it within the game, I can't say that I got that feeling personally, and maybe it's just because of like the context and you're busy trying to dodge the lightning bolts, you're not really spending time kind of just chilling and enjoying the sort of the rain and the atmosphere of that particular area potentially. But Hamauzu's interpretation of that I thought was really nice. And then Uematsu comes in and says, when I listened to the song along with the visuals on the screen, I thought that this right here was the perfect place to use this track. Hamauzu then says, at first it was a track that only featured the piano, but I didn't like it in the end, so I added the sound of the clock. Now, once again, he talks about the fact that it's a song that makes you feel eternity, and then he also goes on to say that he added the sound of a clock into the track, and that's super cool because it further sells that idea of a passage of time. And if you were to just be in the Thunder Plains underneath a lightning tower where you have no risk of being hit and you just sit there and you enjoy the track, because it loops infinitely as well, it really does sell this sort of idea of infinity and eternity. So it's, like I say, it's something that's really deep and profound, and it's not something I really connected with on that level when I played the game, but listening to this interview and the way that he explains the track and talks about it, it did give me a newfound appreciation for it, so I think that's pretty cool. Uematsu then says, Hamauzu's track really gives you the impression that the piano is speaking to you. Hamauzu replies, I think that's what I like about the piano. With it, you can orchestrate with just one instrument, and it's easy to express what you want to do, so it's an instrument I really enjoy using. Yes indeed, next up we have Jack's theme. This is track 2 on disc 3, composed and arranged by Nobuo Uematsu. This is another track that I've always really liked, even though I don't listen to it as frequently and I wouldn't put it like as a top 5 track or anything like that. I always enjoyed listening to this track during those flashback scenes, and it does give me this sort of, I don't know, old nostalgic kind of feeling when I hear it during those scenes with those characters. I also feel like Jack is this sort of tough character who's rough around the edges, but this track sort of shows a bit more of a smoother, maybe warmer, nostalgic side to him, and I also feel like it sells a bit of that journeying vibe because it plays a lot during scenes in which those three are going on that pilgrimage together, and I do feel like it's a bit of a journey when you're listening to the track too, so I've always enjoyed Jack's theme. Uematsu says, Jack has a strong character, so you can apply music of various genres to him. He said, I made a few different tracks for him, but I wanted to give the track a more of an untidy and disorganized kind of feel, so I decided to use a so-called blues note, which is a scale in which the so-called 3rd, 5th, and 7th of that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale is lowered by a semitone. So again, musicians, you'll have a much better idea of what he's talking about. I don't really know what that means, but that's what he said in the interview. Then after doing that, I think I ended up with something that was more like the blues, but with the piano it didn't give me the kind of imagery that I wanted to trigger, so I decided to use a single guitar instead. Then Nakano says, as a genre, is it supposed to be country blues? Uematsu replies yes, and he says, by the way, the slide guitar was actually played by our staff. Now, the slide guitar is apparently like a technique for playing the guitar, and it's used in blues kind of music. He laughs and then says, if I were to try and do that myself, I don't think I could express something so sexy. Okay, so next up we have a track called Assault. This is track 14 of disc 3, composed and arranged by Masashi Hamauzu. This is one of those tracks that for me, even though it's not a standout in the OST in my opinion, for the particular scene and the time in the game that it was used in, it was really, really good. It's definitely a track that I appreciate. I mean, of course, when I hear it, I instantly imagine the FMV scene of the wedding crashing and the way that the party members jump out from the airship and they come in to crash the wedding, and then we have the battles there. So it definitely has that power to trigger the imagery of the experience that I had when I played the game. So I do think it's a really good track. So let's see what Hamauzu had to say about it. He says, this is the only song that I worked on while I was actually looking at the game screen and seeing it in action. The wedding crashes scene ends just after making one loop of the song. Then it switches back to the player so that there's a nice sync. Now again, this is interesting because it's one of the few areas in the game where a track that you hear during a cutscene or outside of battle continues to play during battle. I know that A Fleeting Dream is the most famous one for this, but it's easy to forget that this is another point in the game where this was done. So I think that's really cool. And once again, it's a Hamauzu track in which this happens. He then continues and says, also, I tried to make a track that didn't feel jarring when you transition into battles. From the FMV to the normal game screen, and from there to the battle screen is a track that you can use. And of course he's right about this. I do think that it transitions well and it works well for all three of those, and maybe it's a bit of a testament to how smoothly it works, that maybe people don't mention it as much, that the track continues when you go into the battle. So I think, again, that's a testament to how well planned the track was. And I guess being able to see what you're actually going to be making the music for in this context surely would have worked better. I mean, it did surprise me a bit when I read the parts of the interviews where they said that they made the tracks, but they didn't really know where they were going to be used. So seeing kind of descriptions like this is something where I'm like, yes, this makes a lot more sense, and this is how I would have imagined these tracks were made. And I definitely think they used it to good effect in this particular track. Uematsu then says, that was the best solution for the Bevel Palace Rush scene, just going through with this song playing throughout. And he says, I do think this was the best implementation of the song throughout the game. It's not a song that was used a huge amount, but I do think it definitely worked best in the Wedding Crashers sort of segment as opposed to when you're fighting Sin. But definitely a really good track for that part of the game. And yes, of course, there was no way that we were going to make this compilation without having Suteki Dane in there as well. Track 21, Disc 3. Composer, Nobuo Uematsu. Arrangement, Shiro Hamaguchi. Now this track, of course, is legendary, we all know it, we all remember the scene and the moment in the game when it was used, absolutely brilliant. But for me it also has some personal significance because I actually got to listen to Riki singing this song live at a Distant Worlds concert in London. That was such an amazing moment to hear the original vocalist singing the song live. It was really, really special. So this song is of course very special, and it takes center stage during the romantic scene between Tidus and Yuna, and it's a real important turning point in the journey and has massive ramifications for the rest of the game. So a very, very, very important piece of music, and it's also one of those tracks that forms a bit of a basis for some of the others that you hear in the game as well, of course. So just a really important piece of music for the game. Uematsu begins by saying this game has an atmosphere like Okinawa or Ryukyu. Now I did a little bit of research on this one. I'd heard of Okinawa before, and at least for me the biggest claim to fame that it has is the longevity of the people who live there. I believe at one point it had the longest life expectancy of anywhere on Earth. Now Okinawa is part of the Ryukyu Islands that stretch between Kyushu, Japan and Taiwan. Now one thing we do know is that the developers of Final Fantasy X did want to go for a more Asian feel and atmosphere in this game, and it's fair to assume that this region was an inspiration for some aspects of Spira. Uematsu says, I've been interested in the music of Ryukyu for a long time, so I decided to try and find a singer who fits the theme for this song. Hamauzu then talks about a sound production manager called Mr. Matsushita, who was exploring a lot of CD shops at the time looking for different music and ideas that could be used in Final Fantasy X. Uematsu then says yes, Riki's CD was one of the ones that was included in what he found. He says all I had to do was listen to the first song and I really liked it, and I'd already made my decision to use her for this particular track. Then, when he was wondering how he was going to persuade Kitase and the others, the office staff lent him a video of a TV program in which Riki appears. In this video of Riki, she was singing the song Princess Mononoke with Joe Hisaishi's piano accompanying her. He thought that this was very convincing and he showed it to Kitase and the rest of the staff, and they all decided that it would be her together. Then he talks about despite being able to make this decision, it was still quite a struggle to produce the song and it took quite a while. Then Nakano says, is that so? It seemed like it came together very smoothly and was done in a short amount of time. Uematsu says no, it was a really tough battle. He says that in the end he told himself that he definitely has to finish it tonight, and that he brought a synthesizer with him into the drawing room of the company office and forced himself to get it done. He laughs and says that he managed to complete the song, and he handed it over to Nojima and asked them to write lyrics for it. He says there were times when Nojima's lyrics and the melody of the music didn't quite match, so there was a lot of back and forth between the two, but in the end he was happy with the lyrics that were written for the song. Yes, here it is, my friends. My favorite music from the soundtrack of Final Fantasy X, A Fleeting Dream. Track 8, Disc 4. Composer Nobuo Uematsu. Arrangement Masashi Hamauzu. Now, when people ask me about my favorite track from Final Fantasy X, it's always a struggle. The answer is never clear-cut, but generally I always end up coming back to A Fleeting Dream and saying that that one is probably my favorite of the bunch. Musically, of course, I just love the way it sounds, the instruments that are used, this sort of the atmosphere that it creates, the way that it just transports you to a different world, the feeling that it gives you, and once again, for me, I think it's about context. If you ask me, the peak segment of Final Fantasy X, the place where, for me, I felt the most engaged and my experience was the most heightened, was when you get near the top of Gagazet and all the way through to the battle with Yunalesca. Like, that entire segment for me is the absolute pinnacle of the game. And the fact that this track plays when you arrive at Zanarkand at the end of your pilgrimage and you see the hauntingly beautiful Zanarkand ruins, and this track plays and it continues to play during the battles, that just blew me away the first time I played, and I continued to just enjoy it so much. I mean, whenever I arrive at that area, whether it's in the walkthrough I did, whether it's in any live streams I did, I respond in a way where it feels like it's almost as if you get to see an old friend again. Just being able to get back to that part of the game and just enjoy that atmosphere is just so beautiful to me. So A Fleeting Dream is definitely a very special track for me, and so I'd love to hear what Uematsu and Hamauzu have to say about it. So Uematsu begins, and he says this is a song that Hamauzu arranged with Suteki Dane as a bass, and it's absolutely perfect. Whether it's Nakano or Hamauzu, the music direction is obviously different from mine, so I specifically asked for their work on this. I wanted to add something that I didn't have to Final Fantasy X. In that sense, both of you responded really well and put out what you were good at. So Uematsu is clearly very happy with the arrangement of this track too, and so he should be. This is just an incredible track, it's so good, and it's nice to see the master himself showing a lot of love and appreciation for Hamauzu's work on this one particularly, and of course in general to the work that Hamauzu and Nakano have done on the soundtrack. Hamauzu says it was a really big job that he'd been wrestling with, so it would have been a waste not to show my colours. And he uses the expression colours, but obviously, clearly he's talking about his musical identity and his vision and ideas for how these tracks should sound. Uematsu says, when I made this song, I hadn't decided in which scene it should play. Hamauzu then says that's true, so for the time being, I tried to arrange Suteki Dane without knowing where it would end up. So once again, interestingly, for a track as iconic as this, that was used in such a wonderful part of the game, my assumption would have been, surely this is the work of Uematsu and Hamauzu, where they're looking at the game and this particular section, and they're saying that this track would go really well with this. We also wanted to continue when you go into battle. But based on what this interview is saying, that wasn't the case. So then Hamauzu continues. So then he goes on to say that much like the Thunder Plains track, it's something that I created without knowing where it would go in the game, but creating the kind of track that will hopefully be used in the most suitable place in the game. And then of course he references the fact that much like how Assault continued to play during the Bevelle Palace scenes, A Fleeting Dream also continues to play when you're in battle in the Zanarkand ruins. And he specifically says, I think the people on the event team brought out the goodness of this song. So he's confirming that it was the event team that actually decided for this song to continue playing once you go into battle. So I thought that was really cool, and it's something that I really enjoyed learning about during this interview. And of course it's Uematsu that has the final word on this, and he says truly, they picked a really good place. If you're playing this song, it's the only place. So yes, once again it gets the approval of the big man himself, and it's one of those where once you've heard it and you've experienced it in that way, you just can't imagine it working as well in that kind of style in any other place. So of course we do hear the song in other places, but the whole like continuing the music during the battle and stuff, Zanarkand Ruins for me really is the best place for it. Got to give the event team props for that one. That was a seriously masterful decision, and it's one of my greatest memories from my experience of playing Final Fantasy X. So this next track is one that you only heard one time in the original release of the game, before the Dark Aeons and Penance became a thing. It's called A Contest of Aeons. I believe I've also heard it called Summon Beast Theme. It's track 17 of disc 4. It was composed and arranged by Junya Nakano. So it's nice to have him featuring once again in and among all of the iconic juggernaut pieces from Uematsu and Hamuzu. So this of course is the track that plays when you're fighting against Yevon and he possesses your Aeons, so you have to call them, let them get possessed, and you have to strike them down in order to defeat Yevon once and for all. Always liked this track, thought it was a good one. You hear it a lot when you're fighting Penance as well because of how long the battle is, and I definitely don't remember getting bored of this one. It's definitely a good track. So of this one, Nakano says, "There was a lot of different requests for this song. It's sad, I felt like I couldn't really finish it the way I wanted to, and when I hear it back it feels a little bit like I'm fighting to get it done in the second half of the track." But he says at least I managed to use the melody of the Hymn of the Faith in the track. So Uematsu then basically implies that he kind of almost forced Nakano to use the Hymn of the Faith with this one, because he says that with the context of the game, it's a battle against Aeons, so having the Hymn of the Faith somewhere in the song I think is definitely a good idea. Nakano then laughs and says that's why I forcibly put it in the introduction. Then for the second half of the track he puts in what he describes as an image of an upgraded version of the enemy attack theme used earlier in the game. Uematsu then says this track is similar to Hamuzu's A Fleeting Dream, in the sense that it is an arrangement which I could not have done myself. After all, each person has a different focus. He then asks Nakano what his particular focus is. Nakano says it's the progression of harmony. After that, I want to add a little bad taste to any song. Something that is sad about a fun song, or something pleasant about a sad song. I want to put in an opposite thing to an extent that it does not break the song. Hamuzu then praises this track and he says this song does have that. He says I got excited while listening to it, and the way that it continued on, no matter how many times I got excited, I just couldn't get tired of it, and I could listen to it without annoyance at all. I think it's a very interesting composition. So it's really cool that Hamuzu appreciated that track so much as well. And next up we have Final Battle. This is track 18 of disc 4, composed and arranged by Masashi Hamuzu. This is the track that plays when you're ready to fight Yevon and put an end to the story. I think it's a pretty unique battle theme, but once again it fits the context of the game really well. I mean, yes, technically Yevon is the final battle of the game, but it's also much more symbolic. So I definitely think it would have been strange for this track to have like a really high energy, epic kind of feel, because you're fighting this like almost pathetic looking thing that's so vulnerable and it's kind of trying to cling on for dear life. So I do think that the style of this track really does suit the battle better, because to me at least it feels like the culmination of everything that you've been through in the story and all of the sacrifices that you've made, and the fact that you kind of know that you're going to win this battle because you have this sort of auto life thing going on, and Yevon is relatively so weak. It's almost like a hopeful battle because you know that there's light at the end of the tunnel and you are taking the final steps needed to free Spira from the spiral of death. So I do think it's a really cool moment in the game, and that the track reflects the kind of energy and the kind of feel that it should have. So the premise around this track is actually pretty interesting. Hamuzu says it was a little bit vague at first. He was told that there was going to be about 3 final boss battles, and that this track would be accompanying one of those, so that's what he was told to work on for the time being. He says, then I thought I'd write a song that the other 2 didn't do. We were in the final stages of development, so I tried to do what I liked without leaving any regrets. So I guess this was Hamuzu's kind of goodbye piece as well, something where he really got to express himself creatively and do things the way that he wanted, and I really think it shone through in the nature of the track, because it really is a different kind of style compared to what the other 2 had done previously for the finale. Then we have a little section that's going to appeal once again to the music nerds. Uematsu then says, did you get the hint from the song by Szymanowski? Now Szymanowski, I apologise if I've butchered the name, I probably have. Now I admittedly didn't know who he was, but of course I looked him up, and he is a very important composer of Polish descent, and after the death of Chopin, who is of course one of the most famous composers who ever lived, Szymanowski was one of the most important ones in later generations who made some very important contributions to classical music. Hamuzu says that's right, this song took a lot of time to decide on the direction. The music of the boss battle has a part where the genre and techniques of Szymanowski have been used, so I was a little bit worried about this while listening to various CDs in front of the masterboard. When I played the symphony of Szymanowski that I happened to bring with me, the staff who was there said it is this kind of sound. As a result, there is no trace of Szymanowski in the finished song, but the impression is that it was obtained from Szymanowski. So what I'm generally gathering from this is that he was a creative inspiration for this particular track, but he wanted to put it together in a way that despite this inspiration, you wouldn't listen to it and immediately be able to hear this composer's work within the track. So yes, my friends, we have arrived at the final track featured in this interview. It is called Ending Theme, track 19 of disc 4, composed by Nobuo Uematsu, and the arrangement once again by Shiro Hamaguchi. This is the track that plays during the final FMV after you defeat Yu Yevon. Uematsu says, there was something I wanted to say with the tracks Hymn of the Faith and Two Zanarkand somewhere in the game. Since the FMV was made first, I started from the point where Tidus and Yuna come in close together and he hugs her from behind. Then I made the beginning and the end of the track. If the peaks of the video and the peaks of the music are the same, even if there's some differences in other areas, the image will fit perfectly overall. So then for the final words, I'm not exactly sure what he's trying to say here. The literal translation that I have is, however, including this song, I was able to make something very complete this time, so the next step is difficult. And then he laughs. So what I gather from this is that when you include this song as well, like with his overall compositions and what he's done for the game, he's been able to produce what he considers to be a very complete set of music / a soundtrack. So creatively from here, the next step is going to be quite difficult for him. I may be wrong, but that's the kind of interpretation that I have from the translations that I've received and the general flow of the conversation. So yes, in my opinion, Final Fantasy X is a pretty complete soundtrack. It does have a lot of variety, has a lot of different genres, and the combining together of 3 different, very talented composers has put together an overall package that has so many tracks for people to enjoy that I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to say that Final Fantasy X is not one of the best soundtracks of the franchise. So that's it, my friends. That is the Ultimania section on the music of Final Fantasy X. I had a lot of fun doing this, I learned a lot, and it was really nice to hear some of the behind the scenes and creative process of some of my favourite tracks from the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Special thanks as always to Dawn for the translations, and thank you once again to Alex Mukala for his little cameo in the previous video that I made on the music. Really appreciated that. And with this section concluded, I will need to decide what I'm going to do next with the Ultimania. There are a few more sections that I can potentially cover, but I'll have to sit down and decide which ones I want to tackle and which ones are going to be the most fun to present to you guys. Thank you to everyone that's been enjoying the Ultimania series so far. It's been fascinating to dive through these translations, and it's just the kind of information that Final Fantasy X fanatics like me are always craving, and it's just so exciting and motivated to come across these new things that you haven't seen before. So I hope you guys have shared in some of that enthusiasm with me, and hopefully there will be more from the Final Fantasy X Ultimania, but exactly what it's going to be, I'm not sure at this point. But please do stay tuned and continue to enjoy the channel. I'm sure there's going to be some more Ultimania content coming in the future. So thank you everybody for watching. I will see you soon. Take care.